Elgin is a city in Cook and Kane counties along the Fox River. As of the 2020 census, the city had a population of just under 115,000, the sixth largest city in Illinois, but it's taken a long time and a lot of great history to make Elgin the jewel of the Midwest. James T. Gifford and his brother traveled west looking for a site on the stagecoach route from Chicago to Galena, Illinois. They eventually settled at a spot where the Fox River could be bridged, and in April of 1835 they established the city, naming it after the Scottish tune Elgin. Early Elgin achieved fame for the butter and dairy goods it sold to the city of Chicago, but the dairy industry became less important with the arrival of the Elgin Watch Company. The watch factory employed 3 generations of Elginites from the late 19th century to the mid-20th century, when it was the largest producer of fine watches in the United States. Today, the clocks at Chicago's Union Station still bear the Elgin name. These clocks tell Elgin time, and the hands of Elgin time are always welcoming, and the hands of Elgin time are always willing to greet a hard worker with a firm handshake. It's time now for another chapter in Elgin time, and here to tell the story, live from Studio 14 in downtown Elgin, Illinois, is your host, Steve Thoren.
Yes. Chugging our way into another great show here on WRMN as the clock ticks here on this Tuesday morning. Time for Elgin time. And for that, our monthly Elgin history lesson, we bring in our friend Steve Thoren and a surprising to me guest this morning. Hi, Steve.
Well, good morning, Marky B. It's always good to be here. Hi, everybody out there. Yes, indeed. Elgin Time Radio. More history of Elgin in the past and a neat topic today. Well, Marky B says a little surprise because we flipped the topics from what we were going to talk about, Elgin schools that are no longer, with my guest Jerry Turnquist. And next month was going to be automobile dealers of the past and history in Elgin. Well, we flipped those because sadly Jerry Turnquist lost his brother just a few days ago, and Jerry's handling the arrangements. And so visitation is actually today. And so our hearts go out to Jerry. He'll be with us next month. And I think he's even the guest on the following month. But the good news is the show goes on, and I've got my good friend Scotty McGrath here with us today as we're going to talk about automobiles and automobile dealers and the history. Scotty, welcome to WRMN.
Good morning. Thank you.
He looks pretty excited, I'll tell you that, folks. Well, first let's talk a little bit about the history of cars and automobiles, etc. I wish I had a little more info of some of the car histories that came to Elgin. I do recall one time reading that the very first automobile that was owned in Elgin was in 1902, and it was a Detroit Electric. So I don't, the name escapes me who owned it. It wasn't a prominent citizen that I knew anything about. Obviously, he had a little more money, but it's interesting that the very first car in Elgin was electric.
Yeah, really.
And now they're talking about that coming back, but not in my garage. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Yeah. Elgin had, I know their first fire truck was a Packard, and that was in 1914. And that was the first automotive, before that it was all horses.
Yeah.
But the cars emerged, and of course the Model T. The Model T is the car that put America on wheels, and I know there was a very early Ford dealership in Elgin, and it was down near where the Crocker Theater was. And then the Model T, by the way, was out from 1909 to 1927, and they made 15.5 million Model Ts. Its least expensive year, in 1923, you could buy a Model T Roadster. Roadster meant that it was a convertible with just a front seat, had a little bitty trunk behind it. $269 for a brand new Model T car.
Yeah.
If you bought the touring car, which had the back seat in it, obviously it had 2 more doors that had to operate, and those mechanical parts. The top was bigger. That cost $298. So that's what my Model T is. So My Model T new cost $298. Now it costs $310 just for one tire.
Right.
Pretty amazing difference there. So I thought I would just throw a few fun stats out there. They said, what are the best cars that were out in the 1930s? In the 1930s, the best cars were the Cadillac 16 was the best, the Buick Y-Job, that was the model, and the Buick Roadster, and the 1932 Chevy. So those four different cars were noted as best cars of the 30s, American-wise. The Model A Ford came out in 1928, and they made 5.5 million of them in just 4 years. And then Henry introduced he did have a Model B. It was very, very short-lived. It just had a little more horsepower, but it was still a four-cylinder. And then the infamous V8 came out, Bonnie and Clyde's favorite, by the way.
Yeah.
And then a few other stats that were kind of fun. The best-selling car in 1935, I don't know which car it was, but the best-selling car, how many cars do you think were sold of one brand, any one brand, in 1935? You have any idea, Scotty?
Well, prior to the war, I would guess it would be quite a few, 500,000, maybe 750,000 cars.
Well, it was just shy of 1 million of one car.
Good guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
942,439. And that was a Ford. I'm sorry, I did have that in the notes. So that's how many Fords sold in 1935. Interesting, in 1923, the Model T surpassed 2 million.
Wow.
That was the first year that it sold over 2 million, and being so inexpensive. So the biggest in the 30s is when the big three emerged: Ford, GM, and Chrysler. So there's some history of cars there, and we'll talk about a few car dealerships that were in Elgin that were so notable, but then those cars aren't even available anymore. So I talked about the T's. We're going to kind of fast forward so we can kind of get into the dealers that we talked about, and we're going to talk about the McGrath family history and car dealership history. But auto dealers, I got an old directory out, and I wanted to go through the directory in 1964 and looked at what the car dealers were listed in the Elgin City Directory in 1964. And here's some of the dealers I'm going to list off to everybody. Jerry Biggers Chevrolet was at 227 South Grove Avenue. And Scotty is shaking his head yes, because he wait till you hear some of the memory there. We're going to get into the McGrath legacy. Drago Motor Sales. I don't recall Drago. Have you ever heard of it?
I think that was a used car operation, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. It was on Villa, as your notes point out.
Right.
And everything seemed to be on the new car end, right up and down South Grove.
That's what I would have thought, but they were listed in the new car division, but they didn't list what brand. So DRAGO, Drago Motor Sales, 928 Villa. Highland Motor Sales. Highland Motor Sales was at 192 Wellington, and if my memory serves me correctly, they sold DeSoto's.
Possibly, yes. That obviously a name that's been going a long time. So.
Yes, a long time. In fact, I saw a movie not long ago that was the setting was in the early 60s. And they had an advertisement. They had a thing where the DJ was talking in the movie on the radio, and the commercial said, Studebaker, the car of the future. Well,
short future.
Yeah, it was a short future, right. And the next one is Horace Horace Motor Sales. I remember the man, actually. He was friends with my dad and friends with Scotty, your dad. His name was Joe Horace. And what was he, Dodge?
He was Chrysler Dodge, or if I'm not, no, it was Dodge. You're right. It was split up because Chrysler was separate at that point in time, if I'm not mistaken.
And he was at 222 South Grove. Of course, all of these are where Festival Park is, because back in the day, that was called Automobile Row.
Yeah.
It was solid automobile dealers all the way from like the Crocker Theater all the way to the Watch Factory. At the very end was Bungy's, and then the little drugstore on the far corner. And right there at the very corner of National Street and Grove was the drugstore where I bought my comic books. Let's see. The next one we have is Jim Kelly Ford, 235 South Grove. And Jim Kelly Ford in 1964, I believe even we're going to look in 1975, they were still called Jim Kelly Ford, but I think it was shortly after that they changed to Jim Whalen.
Yes.
The next one is Mardell Motors. And they were listed as new car dealer, but I don't know what they sold. They were at 895 Villa. I wish I bet you anything, Ken Barnhart would know the answer to these. So I'll throw a few answers in next show just as a little follow-up. Then we've got one that's going to be an interesting history topic as we move on in a little bit here. McBride Brothers, Buick and Opel. And that was 156 South Grove. But it's interesting that building right over there is the McBride building. Now, they didn't have cars over there, though, I don't believe.
Originally, the Buick store, and it could have been McBride, I don't know the exact history, but was located down by the corner of what is East Chicago Street and Douglas. At one point, it became a bank.
Okay.
And then they moved to Auto Row at 156 South Grove. So that could have some history to it through there.
Sure. So. I'm sure Jerry Turnquist knows, so I'm going to find that out. And, it's interesting that in 1964, it listed McBride Brothers, Buick, and Opel. I was very surprised. I remember the Opel GT.
Yes.
But I don't remember the earlier cars. I think they were kind of like a little Austin or something.
They were called a Cadet.
Yeah. Yes, Opel Cadet. Yes. I remember that now that you bring it up. Yep. And how old is the Opel brand? Do you know?
Oh, it's been around a long time. General Motors picked it up or affiliated itself with it. It's a German brand back in the early 60s. They're still affiliated, but everything with Opel is actually retained in Germany with a lot of General Motors product.
And when did that Opel GT come out?
1969. Fun car. It looked like a baby Corvette with,
yes, it did.
With flip-up headlights that you actually grabbed a stick inside and pulled it back.
So it was manual.
Yes.
Manual
right.
flip-up headlights.
And my brothers and my sisters and I all had arguments because the girls always seemed to get Opels to drive, Opel Cadets. And we always drove the cars from the fifth row, which were junk used cars, and we had to fix them and put them back on the lot and sell them.
So your sister Debbie got an Opel.
Yeah, she did pretty well.
Oh, that's funny. Well, we'll talk more about McBride to McGrath and how that transitioned after we finish the 64 dealers. The next one we have is Pierce Motor Sales, and I remember that was Pierce Pontiac.
Correct.
And they were also at 250 South Grove. So we got all these different South Groves all in a row.
Yes.
You could just go down Grove Avenue, and here was Pontiac, and here was Buick, and Opel, and Ford, and Dodge, and Biggers, and Chevrolet, I mean. Well, then we have Reed Motors. Reed Motors was at 1341 Dundee Avenue, so that would have been quite a ways up north.
Right.
And I don't know what Reed sold.
Neither do I.
R-E-E-D.
Right.
Then Ross Rambler. Rambler sales. Rambler had to be kind of near the end of their time in '64. I don't remember.
Yeah,
how long
Rambler hence became AMC, American Motor Corporation.
Oh, that's right.
And then they picked up Jeep, and then they were silly enough to roll Jeep off for a cheap price to Chrysler, and that's how Chrysler became very popular, because Jeep is probably one of the most popular brands out there right now. So.
Sure. You're looking at a Jeep owner right here.
Yeah. Yep.
But it was probably a tough decision between a Jeep and a Nissan, just so you know.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate that.
It was.
As long as that was on the shopping list, I'm okay.
So that's Ross Rambler. And, of course, American Motors, I don't remember. There's no ad in here, but that's because they weren't around at that time yet.
Right.
Rowe, R-O-W-E, Rowe Motors, which was Oldsmobile and Cadillac. And they were at 174 South Grove Avenue.
Right.
Along with the next is Salisbury's.
Yes.
Salisbury's was at 138 South Grove. Do you remember what Salisbury was?
Lincoln Mercury.
Lincoln Mercury.
Right.
I think there's a reason why you remember that.
Yes.
We're going to talk about that. I just thought I'd throw this in for fun. In 1964, looking in the Elgin City Directory, if you looked under the yellow pages under used car dealers, used cars, here's just a few. I didn't put the addresses down, but here's a few of the names of these businesses. Barnes, Biggers, Bill's Used Cars, CJ's Used Cars, Cartwright, Deming, Dunning, Elgin Imports, Hartwell, Hecht. Hecht Used Cars was at 672 Wing Street. And I tried to figure out where the heck that was. That had to be where Elgin Medi Transport is now. Because otherwise it's just all houses. So I don't know where else it could have been. So I'm going to look. I wrote the address down so I could look it up. Juby Used Cars, and I know that name. They had Juby's Pharmacy, but they had a used car lot on Bluff City Boulevard. Jim Kelly Ford had used cars. Mardell, again, they had used cars on Villa. McBride had used cars, used Buicks. Olson Used Cars. North State Street Motors. Well, I think they were probably on North State Street. Puckett. Well, I'm sure Scotty remembers the infamous Elmer.
Yes, I do.
And he was a character. And I specifically remember his large neon sign that was of a Model T, and the wheels went backwards. They were motion wheels on the sign, and they were moving, and they went backwards. And Renwick Motors, Ross Rambler Sales, Rowe Motors, and finally Zaske, Z-A-E-S-K-E, Zaske Used Cars at 513 North Crystal Street. Once again, I can't place where that would be, but interesting. All those dealers, and in those days, you wanted to just open up buy 4 or 5 cars and sell one out of your house. I imagine you could probably do it.
Yes, you could.
And so then we're going to move to 1975, and I've got the city directory from 1975, and there's so many things. There's ads in there, and that's when we see McGrath name. Now, while we see it in the McGrath name in 75, let's talk a little bit with Scotty here about the McGrath family history in the automobile business. It's a name that so many people know in Elgin, but how did it come to be? And I've known the McGrath family since they joined Elgin Country Club. And I remember when you moved into, when you got your house over there. So tell us a little history about your parents, Leo and Jean McGrath.
Well, as I was mentioning earlier to you, my father was actually a car dealer in 1948 from Caledonia, Minnesota. He sold Pontiacs, Jeeps, and gasoline, and the gasoline outsold all the cars, surprisingly.
And where is Caledonia?
Just over the river from La Crosse into Minnesota.
Got it.
Right. So he got called back into the armed services. He was an Air Force Marine guy. Got called back into to fly in Korea. Lost the dealership, and when he came back out, he went to work for General Motors in about early 50s.
So he was in Korea. Was he flying over there?
He was flying there, but mostly he made it to a major, and they had him actually training. So he was more training there versus combat, which we did in World War II.
But was he over there?
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
He was over there training.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
he was in World War II also.
Yes. Yeah, he flew Corsair.
My goodness, I didn't realize that about your dad. Thank you.
Yep.
May he rest in peace.
Yeah,
of course,
thanks.
he's gone, but I know he was friends with my dad.
Yeah,
And-
good friends.
And even though he thought I was wild.
No comment. So he came to work for General Motors, and after about 11 years, the McBride store became available for whatever reason, and my father purchased the store in 1964, late 1964.
So it's in the 64 Elgin directory because, of course, the information probably for that had to have been verified in 1963.
Right.
And
Right.
But at that time, when your dad when he got out of the service, he went to work for General Motors. But whereabouts in General Motors? In Chicago?
He was a trainer. He was a sales trainer all over the place. But his last gig, I guess, would be operating out of Bill Cook Buick in Arlington Heights, and as a result, that's where we lived. So when we bought the store, he bought the store in 1964. We lived in Arlington Heights for 2 additional years. My father just commuted back and forth, and then we bought a place here in '66.
Got it, in Arlington Heights.
Right.
Well, it's time for our short news break at the bottom of the hour. So we got to take a break, Scotty, and then we'll be back with a lot more unique, fun, interesting family history and automotive history as soon as we get back from these messages. Thanks, Mark.
Yes,
Stick
sir.
with us, everybody.
It's Elgin time. It's a Tuesday morning, and we're headed for a high today, about 83 degrees. We're around 60 right now, and thanks for listening to The Voice of the Valley and the talk of the town. More on the way with Elgin time in just a couple of moments. Our guest today, Scotty McGrath.
With your 1410 WRMN News Flash, I'm Sean Curdan. Brought to you by Sky Rizzy. Elgin is set to commemorate Patriot Day with a solemn remembrance ceremony September 11th at the Hemmons Cultural Center. The event is scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. and will feature the Elgin Fire Department, Elgin Police Department, and honored guests presenting flags. Participants will be treated to a rendition of the national anthem by Larkin High School students, heartfelt remarks from city officials, and representatives of the American Legion Post 57. In an effort to address the educational needs of Americans without a four-year college degree, Illinois is receiving an $8 million boost from the Apprenticeships Build America grants. The funding is part of a $244 million initiative by the U.S. Department of Labor. 57-year-old David R. Glass facing severe legal repercussions after being charged with multiple felonies related to child pornography. The McHenry County Sheriff's Office, in collaboration with the Illinois Attorney General's Office, charging Glass with 10 counts of reproducing or selling child pornography and 10 counts of possession. With your 1410 WRMN News Flash, I'm Sean Curdan.
What's better than one win? 3 wins. With Straight Savings, you keep your own phone, get one line for only $25 a month with real unlimited data, and get rewarded with a $200 phone credit after 12 months. It's a win-win-win. Head to Walmart or visit straighttalk.com today. Switch to Straight Talk. Less dollars, more sense. Straight Savings Plan enrollment requires compatible unlocked device and new line of service. Bonus device credit requires 12 months of active service. Offer ends if eligibility requirements are no longer met. Taxes and fees apply. For network management practices, see Straight Talk's terms and conditions.
Progressive presents Renter's MVP's Most Valuable Possessions. Today's MVP, Tom Kelly's carbon fiber mountain bike. Because more than riding his carbon fiber mountain bike, Tom loves telling people about his carbon fiber mountain bike. Friends, family, even a local barista knows about his carbon fiber mountain bike. And that's why Tom's carbon fiber mountain bike, if you haven't heard about it, is today's MVP. Keep your most valuable possessions protected by bundling your renters and auto insurance with Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates and other insurers not available in all states.
Progressive presents the Sports Flash on News Talk Radio 1410 WRMN.
Fanned off to Debo, a block and a dive for the goal line, and he's up on the goal line and in. Touchdown! San Francisco!
The call on Niners radio on last night's 32-19 win over the Jets. Fill-in running back Jordan Mason ran for 147 yards and a touchdown in place of the injured Christian McCaffrey as the 49ers spoiled Aaron Rodgers' comeback game. On the other side, Brock Purdy 19 for 29 passing, 231 yards. San Francisco got a pair of rushing touchdowns, one from Mason, the other from Debo Samuel. Jake Moody 6 for 6 on field goal attempts. His longest was 53 yards. San Francisco scored on 8 consecutive drives in the season-opening win. McCaffrey sat the game out due to injuries to his calf and Achilles. Up next, a matchup with the Vikings.
Bundle auto and home, renters or condo, and save with Progressive.
I'm Chuck Sanders on News Talk Radio 1410 WRMN.
Progressive presents Renter's MVP's Most Valuable Possessions. Today's MVP, Emily Neal's 70-inch TV. Because after watching her second-grade students yell at each other for hours, there's nothing Emily enjoys more than watching super-rich housewives also yell at each other. Why? Because those women are not her responsibility. And that's why her TV is today's MVP. Keep your most valuable possessions protected by bundling your renters and auto insurance with Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates and other insurers not available in all states.
You might wonder, John Legend, how do you keep your voice sounding so legendary? Honey. And how do I keep my protection against COVID-19 up to date? With a COVID shot this season, designed for recent variants.
You can get your COVID-19 shot when getting your flu shot if you're due for both, as recommended by the CDC.
The fresher, the better.
Ask your healthcare provider about getting this season's COVID-19 shot when getting your flu shot.
Elgin Time continues on this Tuesday morning on WRMN, AM 1410, WRMN Radio on YouTube. If you want to say something, I'll let Steve and Scotty know what you've said on YouTube at WRMN Radio on YouTube, and our Image 360 information line, 505-926-1410. We're talking about the history of automobiles and auto dealerships in Elgin, Illinois. Welcome back, Steve.
Hey, thanks, Marky B, and thanks for sticking with us, everybody out there. So I've got my guest here, a good, long-time, lifelong friend, Scotty McGrath, with me, and everyone knows the name McGrath with car sales in Elgin. And we left off with Scotty telling us a little bit about how his dad bought McBride Buick in late 1964 because his dad worked for General Motors and heard about the opportunity. I guess McBride was struggling a little bit, evidently. Whatever reasons, that's why it was becoming available. And at the time, the McGrath family lived in Arlington Heights. And so your dad bought McBride Brothers, and do you recall at that time that was on Grove Avenue, correct, Scott?
That's correct. That's correct.
And so then what's your memory of the early days when you were a kid and you came to the dealership for as a little kid and seeing the new dealer and the McGrath signage going up and things like that?
It was very exciting. I mean, my father immediately changed the floor tile in the store to be red and white checkered, and people in Elgin just thought that was just crazy looking, but it worked. We sold a lot of cars. My father was notorious at picking up franchises for anything and everything he wanted. So at one point he wanted a boat, so all of a sudden we were working on Evinrude's. My brother Gary and my brother Jim and I fixing them.
Evinrude engines?
Evinrude engines, Evinrude boats. Evan Rude snowmobiles. Remember those out of Elgin?
Sure.
And then my father needed a lawnmower, so suddenly we were a Case tractor dealer, and we started working on those, fixing engines.
And where did he
blades.
have the tractors and the boat?
The boats and everything else was across the street from 156 South Grove, we rented out the lower half of it for all the crazy stuff, and the used car lot next to it, and then the detail area behind it. So, and one of the least enjoyable things we had to work on. Back then, we didn't have car washes. We had 55-gallon drums on wheels with a roller. And we would fill up that 55-gallon drum, and us kids would push the 55-gallon drum from car to car, wipe them down, and then roll the towel through the roller, and then push it to the next car. So a lot of fun, but when you're 11 years old, it gets a little big.
It gets a little old fast, I'm sure. So I recall your conversation once that all the kids in your family were washing cars, like on a Saturday morning.
Yep.
For car sales, and the cars are always clean on a car lot.
Yes.
So when there's cars outside, you got to keep washing them, and you got to keep wiping the ones inside because they keep getting loaded with fingerprints.
Correct.
And what about, and of course, test driving cars? Did they test drive cars that were in the showroom, or did they mainly test drive cars that were outside?
Well, you usually try to work with a car outside because it's always the last car they want to drive in the showroom, and you're going to move 4 cars to get the 1 car out. So you usually try and keep the car outside.
And then they end up buying the one that's outside anyway.
Right, exactly. So.
Oh, my. Such neat memories there. Well, we got a lot more to talk about with the McGrath family and how they grew into it. I did like the Opel story. And, of course, growing up, knowing your sister so well, I didn't remember her having an Opel GT out at the club, but that's so neat. When they came out, I mean, it really did look like a miniaturized Corvette Stingray.
Yes.
And I don't know how long that model was out, but, of course, that's what put Opel on the map.
It did. I think it was from 1969. I think the car ran until about 73, or 72. And I think the big hiccup with that car was the bumper requirements, because everything went to a 5-mile-an-hour bumper at that point in time, and the redesign on that car would have been impossible because the bumpers were a 5-mile-an-hour bumper would have been bigger than the car, so it just wouldn't have worked.
Right, it was too small and light.
Yes,
it wasn't going to make it.
Right.
Well, let's. I'll talk about some other. I did have this question though. As we talk about your dealership, Nissan, a lot of people wonder, well, Nissan's been around a while, but you don't see any real old Nissans. What did Nissan morph from?
Nissan came over in the early 50s as Datsun.
Datsun,
yes.
That was it. The Datsun 280Z, I remember.
Yeah, well, it was actually a small pickup truck, and then it morphed into a couple other things. But the Z came out. That obviously put us on the map in the late 60s.
But didn't Datsun have to do with Japanese engines?
Yeah,
airplanes.
Well, that was the reasoning behind the Datsun name. So when they came over, Nissan was actually the producer of the engine for the Japanese Zero for World War II.
And of course, we know.
Yeah,
everybody knows, if they know any history, those were the ones that flew into Pearl Harbor.
So they figured that was going to be some blowback on that. So they decided to come up with the Datsun name. And then in 1984, somebody at Nissan corporate headquarters said, okay, that's enough. We're going to flip it back to Nissan. And that's how that started. So you would see a new 810 by Datsun, or from Datsun by Nissan. And then it just flipped to Nissan completely after 1985.
Oh, how cool. Here's another interesting story, and I'm not sure what year this was, but if we look at the dealerships again in the directory in 1975, Bird Datsun was at 235 South Grove. So Datsun was big enough to have its own dealership. And that's when, at that time, of course, in 75, your dad was 11 years into having his McGrath Buick dealership. When did, and because you've got Nissan, how did McGrath family acquire that?
The Bird Datsun actually kind of got in a little bit of a trick bag because in 1976, I want to say, they also had a very large body shop, and it caught on fire and burned the entire place down, and it put them in a real precarious position. I believe they sold out to, I can't remember the name of who it became, but then it became Brothers Nissan, which was the store out on 19 across from the Ford store at 1045 East Chicago Street. Then Fox Valley bought it from them, and then we bought it from Fox Valley in 1990.
1990,
right.
The McGrath name went to Nissan.
Right.
Got it. Well, pretty neat history. Speaking of the McGrath name, you lived in Arlington Heights as a little kid, and then you moved here in 1966.
Correct.
To the Country Knolls subdivision there off of McLean Boulevard on Lindlore Lane. And I know that with your large family, your parents built that house and made sure it was a big one.
Yes.
It had a lot of bedrooms, and I remember going in there. And now that home has its second owner, and that second owner calls up here and speaks to Marky B on a regular basis, and that's Pat Hudgens.
Yeah.
So Pat Hudgens lives in the McGrath family home.
Did not know that.
How about that for a neat bit of history?
Yeah.
Pat and Debbie and I are good friends.
Yes.
And Vicky. Sorry,
Yes.
Vicky, not going to leave you out.
Yes. We never leave Vicky out.
No, we don't.
Here's a few other dealers from 75 that were listed. Lohr Mark IV Motors, Jim Kelly Ford, still there, Horace Dodge, Mersman Pierce Pontiac, Reeves Oldsmobile Cadillac. Of course, that was John Reeves, so that name went from Rowe to Reeves. And Schukert Motor Sales is listed. And, of course, they were at that time GMC. Correct. And Veggie Brothers Motor Sales and Jim Whalen Ford. Well, here's an interesting little tidbit of history. Schukert Motor Sales was offered the Honda automobile dealership. But Bill Schukert's dad didn't believe that car was going to make it. So he turned it down. And tell us about how McGrath got Honda.
Yeah, that was 1971, and my father had worked a deal out, or was working a deal out, to get the Mazda franchise, and in the 11th hour lost it to another franchisee, and was really upset about that, and decided he was going to pick up the phone and call Honda out in California, because he knew they sold motorcycles, and he heard they were going to try and sell a car. And they said, yeah, we've got a car coming out. He says, I'll take it. And he ended up taking the franchise in 1971.
And that's when the Civic was out, but it was very teeny.
Small. It was a very small four-seater hatchback, sold for about $1,900 new. We had them stacked up, and they weren't selling very well. They started to pick up a little bit, but the big switch came in 1976 when the Honda Accord came out, and that became just a big hit. Everybody wanted one. We used to watch the actual truck pull into town with a load full of Honda Accords, and there'd be a line of cars behind that truck pulling into the dealership to find out if they were sold or not. And they were all pre-sold.
Really? Wow.
It's crazy.
My first brand new car was a 1979 Honda Accord, and I bought it at McGrath Honda.
There you go.
So you didn't even know that.
I probably washed it.
That was it. Boy, is this shiny.
Yep.
It was copper colored.
Okay.
And then I had a friend of mine in DeKalb, and I had her come out, and she bought a 1980, a gray Honda Accord. So from McGrath. So I got some early sales for you. Tried to make your dad like me more.
Not a problem there.
Well, in 1975, here's a few used cars that were listed. One was called Just Cars at 871 North Liberty. Well, that had to be across the street from the American Legion, probably in that big parking lot where that, right there where that grocery store is, Armando's.
Yeah.
And because Legion's 820. Another one was Harrah's Used Cars, 918 Dundee Avenue. Motor Cars International. Jim Schultz Car Sales, 1341 Dundee Avenue.
I got a message from George. He said maybe you could bring up Earl Madman Muntz, legendary American businessman who dropped out of Elgin High School and opened a used car lot.
Yes.
He opened a used car lot, and I didn't look back in the earlier directories. And of course, he was a character, and he went on to have the very first discounted television as well. But he did come out with a car that was as he put it, his competition to the early Corvette. And it was called the Muntz Jet. And it was so ugly that now I think it looks cool. But they're very hard to find and very rare. And I remember that he gave one to Phyllis Diller.
Oh, my.
And Phyllis Diller said it was the only convertible that didn't mess up her hair. Of course, her hair looked like a mop anyway.
Yeah.
So that was the joke on that. So we'll talk a little bit more about McGrath history. So in 66, your family lived here in Elgin, and you had the Buick store, but then pretty soon you got Honda in 1971. Tell us how the growth of McGrath Buick continued on. You were at 156 South Grove Avenue at the time. You had a few other fingers and pies across the street.
Right.
And you were washing cars as a kid.
Yes. In 1972, the Salisbury Lincoln Mercury store became available. And
that was just a couple doors down.
Right next door.
Right
and
next
my
door.
father went in and purchased it and made my brother Michael a partner in it. And as a result of that partnership, he became the youngest Lincoln Mercury dealer in the United States at the age of 21.
And,
wow.
But they didn't name it McGrath. They changed it from Salisbury to what, Heritage?
Heritage Lincoln Mercury. And then that Heritage name stuck with everything that Mike ever did from that point on.
And was that the first one to move out to Chicago Street?
So the first ones that went out there were, it was actually Leo Lecter went out there with Jerry Biggers first. And then the Ford store followed with Jim Whalen. And then
you remember what year that would have been?
I would guess it would have been probably around 73, because the dealership that my father purchased and we are currently in was a short-lived AMC Jeep dealership that lasted 2 months. And then the building sat vacant. My father bought it from the bank, and that became the current 945 East Chicago Street, McGrath Buick, and now McGrath Nissan.
Got it. What was it when it had become vacant?
Prior to that, it was an AMC Jeep dealership.
I see. So AMC was out there,
yes.
But then they didn't make it.
No, it didn't, unfortunately. Well, fortunate for us, but unfortunate for them.
So when did you move the Buick dealership out there then in like 78?
1974.
74.
Right.
Now, when did your brother Jimmy get involved in the dealership?
Well, we were all, from kids on up involved. My father, my brother Jim, I believe became buying the Buick store out in 1988. They'll probably call in and tell me I'm wrong, but it was 1988. And then my father reacquired the store back from him in 1990. I want to say it was 1998, 1997, something along that lines.
That was kind of when it just didn't fit for Jim. I was so close to Jim growing up. Jim and I were the same age, and you were a little younger.
And a single-point Buick dealership isn't the easiest thing in the world to work with. That's why General Motors worked so hard to became Buick, Pontiac, GMC truck as a combination.
So Jim had Buick out there for a while,
right?
And then your dad took Buick back over, and then I'm curious, with all the success for so many years, and that being the catalyst of the McGrath franchises. I think it was in the early 2000s. Your dad decided to sell Buick.
Yeah, he's actually he sold at that point in time. It had become Buick, Nissan, and Kia. We had picked up Kia in 2000, and in 2006, I had purchased the franchises from him and also purchased the building, and I looked at my father and said, General Motors doesn't want us anymore. They want it to be Buick, Pontiac, GMC truck. And he said, well, if you got to sell it, you got to sell it. So we sold it in 2006.
You sold it to Woody
Buick, correct? Yeah. Who was a dealer originally out of, trying to remember, over on the east side. So very popular, very effective guy, good guy.
Sure, and his name is Woody.
Yep.
And I remember all of his commercials. Woody Buick here. Yeah, this is Woody.
That's right.
And
never a dull moment with him.
And it was about, I'm going to guess, 7-8 years ago. Maybe time flies. Maybe as much as 15 years ago when I think he moved to Naperville.
Right. Yeah.
So Woody's still busy down there. And down there with Woody Buick.
Woody Buick GMC. That's the combo.
So then you've just focused on Nissan.
Correct.
And tell us about where McGrath Nissan is, what they're doing now.
Okay. In 2006, we redid the building just to Nissan completely, and now we are currently in the middle of rebuilding or building a new building at the corner of Randall and 90. At the new Elgin Auto Mall, or 90 Randall Auto Mall, with a new Nissan store out there.
And is that the last lot?
Well, it's the center lot. I believe there's still 2 more lots out there.
So there could potentially still be 2 more dealers.
That's correct.
That come out there.
That's correct.
And each time another one goes in, it enhances what's there.
Correct.
Sure.
Yeah.
And your brother's out there.
My brother Gary is out there with the Honda store. Elgin Volkswagen is out there. WEG Auto Group with Kia. And just down the street, on either side, you've got the Subaru store on one side, and you've got the Mazda store on the other.
So Mazda, Subaru, Kia, Honda, and Volkswagen.
It's the new Auto Row.
Yeah, it's the new Auto Row.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
They just generate like that. They move.
And that's on Randall Road, just north of 90, the opposite side of Jimmy's Char House. And it's where Randy's Vegetables used to be.
Which is now where Mazda is.
Yes.
Mazda purchased that property.
They purchased it from Randy's Vegetables, which we ate a lot of corn from there.
I was going to say, I missed the corn.
Yes, I bet. Now, your brother, Gary, he started Honda about 1984. He started with Honda in 84. And how many dealerships does he have now?
I would say that Gary, between all of the Chicagoland area and Florida, has, I believe, 9.
9 dealerships.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, that also includes Volvo.
Volvo twice. He has a Volvo store in Barrington, and he has a Volvo store in Florida.
And Acura.
He has 2 Acura stores.
Acura is essentially the high-end Honda.
Correct.
And I remember when that came out, it was just like somebody said to me once, imagine if it was beer, it's the Michelob of Budweiser.
Right. That would. I don't know if Gary will agree with that, but yeah, I agree with you on that one. Because I sell Nissans.
Yes, it's just kind of an interesting pun on it. But
right.
I think at the same time as when Toyota came out then with Infiniti.
Well, no, Toyota's got Lexus.
Oh, Lexus.
Nissan has Infiniti.
Nissan has
Right.
Infiniti. I am
and now
talking
got,
to you, and I got you mixed up.
And now you've got Hyundai coming out with Genesis. So every large franchise like that is coming out with a larger tier.
A higher end
line.
thing.
Yeah.
So, but you don't have Infiniti.
No, Nissan doesn't like Nissan dealers having Infiniti dealers or vice versa. They like to have everybody stay focused on what's going on. The Acura stores were a little different back in the day.
Steve, we're about out of time, about a minute left.
All righty.
Yeah, and we've also got a special award we want to present to Scott McGrath for coming in today and for being a part of America's First Responders Fest over the past several years since we started 4 years ago. Dino's here, stealing the microphone from Steve Thoren at the last moment. Hey, Dino.
It's a hard thing to do, get a microphone out of Steve Thoren's hand. But listen, we didn't have opportunity. Scott had tripped us a little bit too early from our America First Responders Fest. But each year he's been such a supporter and a silent supporter. So we're giving to him this lovely award.
Thank you.
For being the guy behind the scenes, not looking for the glory, not looking for the sign. Scott, we can't thank you enough. Thank you very much from Mark and myself.
Thank you.
All of us at America First Responders, including Steve Thoren. He's a part of our program. So thank you very much. We just wanted to get some acknowledgement for what he has done so tirelessly and selflessly. Thank you very much. And hey, don't forget, 11 o'clock, we got a special announcement.
Thanks, Scott, for coming in today.
Thanks.
Appreciate you. And Steve, we'll see you on Friday. We got to go. Have a good one.
All righty. Thanks, everybody.
Prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.